I wasn't planning to leave the apartment that morning. My laptop was open on the kitchen table, emails waiting, projects half finished, the kind of routine I usually let swallow me whole. Yet something restless pressed against my chest, a strange unease I couldn't name. I poured another cup of coffee, scrolled through my bank app, and saw nothing unusual. Still, the itch remained. It was ridiculous. I'd managed my accounts online for years. The Belmont Avenue branch was barely a mile away, but I almost never stepped inside anymore. Still, as I stood by the window, watching the late morning sun angle over the neighboring roofs, a thought came clear as a command. Go to the bank. I tried to reason with myself. Why bother? The bills were on auto pay. My rent cleared, my freelance checks deposited directly. Nothing demanded my presence. Yet the thought refused to let me go. By the third time I'd circled the apartment, pretending to tidy up. I sighed and grabbed my bag. The drive was short. The streets hummed with weekday quiet. A handful of cars at each light. A mother pushing a stroller. A man in a suit checking his watch. I turned into the branch parking lot, expecting the usual mid-morning bustle. Instead, it looked strangely bare, 2 cars at most. I cut the engine, sat for a moment, and told myself I was wasting time. But I still opened the door. Inside my bag, my fingers brushed the smooth edge of my debit card, the same one I'd used since college. I thought about the years I'd built a fragile independence taking contract jobs, saving for my own place, pushing back whenever my parents insisted they knew better. Every step felt hard-won, and still, they managed to press shadows over my choices. I locked the apartment door in my mind as much as I had that morning in reality, wanting to believe I could shut out their influence whenever I wished. Yet, now, as I stepped out of the car and smoothed the wrinkles in my blouse, I couldn't ignore the quiet certainty tightening in my stomach. I walked toward the glass entrance of the bank, unaware that the moment I crossed that threshold, the foundation of my life would begin to shift. The air inside the branch was cool and quiet, the kind of hush that usually reminded me of waiting rooms. I expected to see 1 or 2 people at the counter, maybe a clerk arranging papers. Instead, my eyes caught on 2 familiar figures standing near the manager's desk. My parents. They were dressed neatly, as if they'd planned this morning carefully, my father in his pressed navy blazer, my mother in a pale silk blouse she reserved for important occasions. They stood close together, their posture calm, their voices low but deliberate. I slowed my pace, instinct telling me not to interrupt. The words drifted over before I could stop them. "Our daughter doesn't recognize us anymore," my father said smoothly, his tone carrying the weight of a man who believed himself reasonable. "She forgets names, places. We've consulted doctors. It's progressing," my mother added softly. "We're only here to protect her. She's not capable of handling her finances alone." My stomach clenched, my breath stalled. They were talking about me as if I weren't alive, as if I weren't whole. The manager nodded along, flipping through a folder my father had handed him. From where I stood, hidden half behind a tall divider, I could see the edge of my own name printed on one of the pages, Callista Mercer. My life reduced to a file, spoken about in the past tense by the 2 people who raised me. They looked so composed, so certain, like benevolent guardians doing the hard but necessary thing. Anyone else would have believed them. Perhaps I would have too, if I hadn't been standing right there, pulse racing, ears burning with each false word. I pressed my palm against the divider, grounding myself, because if I didn't, I might have believed their story myself. I stepped forward, each footfall echoing across the polished floor, carrying me out of the shadows and directly into the lie they had crafted. My footsteps carried farther than I expected, the sharp taps breaking the spell of their polished performance. My father's voice faltered mid-sentence, and my mother's hand froze on the edge of the desk. Both turned at once, their faces shifting from composure to something tighter, almost brittle. "Good morning," I said evenly, though my throat burned. The manager blinked at me, glancing between us as if he had walked into a play halfway through and suddenly realized the actors were improvising. My father recovered first, forcing a small smile. "Callista, sweetheart. You weren't supposed to." I cut him off. "I wasn't supposed to what? Here you declare me incapable of managing my own life." My mother stepped forward, voice low and sweet, as though soothing a child. "Darling, you've been under stress. Sometimes you forget things." "We just wanted to make sure I forget nothing," I snapped, louder than I intended. The bank lobby felt too quiet, my words bouncing against the walls. I turned to the manager, meeting his startled eyes. "My name is Callista Mercer. I am not under medical care. I have not authorized guardianship, and I certainly recognize my own parents." His mouth opened, then closed, slowly. He lifted the folder from the desk, holding it out toward me like a fragile offering. My fingers shook as I took it, but I didn't break eye contact with the people who raised me. My father's jaw clenched. "You don't understand. This is for your own protection." I let out a laugh, sharp and humorless. Protection or convenience. Silence swelled between us, so thick I could almost taste it. The manager excused himself quietly, retreating to another office, leaving the three of us standing in a triangle of truth none of us wanted. I held the folder to my chest, feeling the weight of it press into me like a verdict. Then, without another word, I turned toward the exit, each step heavier than the last, carrying the proof of their betrayal out into the daylight. I set the folder down on my kitchen table, the laminate surface suddenly feeling too small to contain it. For a long time, I just stared, my hands pressed flat against the wood as though bracing myself against a storm. Finally, I forced the cover open. Inside were neatly clipped documents, medical notes, statements, forms I had never signed. The first page claimed I suffered from progressive cognitive decline. Another bore signatures, not mine, authorizing guardianship to my parents. Each sheet carried the stamp of finality, as if my identity had already been stripped from me and cataloged for storage. My throat tightened as I read line after line, my name threaded through their lies. I remembered my father saying last winter, "You're always forgetting where you left things." After I misplaced my keys, I had laughed it off then, not realizing he was planting a seed. My mother's soft sighs when I told her I was juggling too many projects. "You can't handle stress. Callista. You never could." At the time it felt like pity, now it sounded like rehearsal. I flipped another page and saw the date of a supposed evaluation. That same week I'd gone for a routine checkup, leaving the office with a clean bill of health. No decline, no warning. But here, in black and white, was a version of me I didn't recognize, frail, confused, incapable, a version they had invented. I pushed back from the table, the chair scraping against the floor. The folder sat there like an open wound, bleeding trust onto everything it touched. All the late-night calls from my mother asking if I'd eaten, my father insisting I should let them manage my rent to make life easier. Every gesture reassembled itself now into a pattern I couldn't ignore. I pressed my palms over my eyes, willing the weight in my chest to lessen, but it didn't. It only hardened. The doorbell rang, sharp and sudden, pulling me back to the room and toward the confrontation I knew was coming. The bell echoed through the apartment again, sharper this time, like they were trying to hurry me into answering. I opened the door and there they were, standing side by side on my doormat, faces arranged in polite concern. My mother's eyes darted past me into the apartment as though searching for the folder she already knew was inside. I stepped aside without a word. They walked in, their movements practiced, too comfortable in a space that was mine alone. I followed them to the kitchen, where the folder still sat on the table, unopened since I pushed it away. I pulled out a chair, sat down, and with deliberate care placed the folder in the center between us. My father cleared his throat. Callista, we didn't want you to find out like this. It's a precaution. Nothing more. Precaution. My voice came out low. Even, these are forged documents. These signatures aren't mine. And these medical notes fabrications? My mother reached for the folder, but I pressed my hand on top of it. She withdrew quickly, folding her hands in her lap. Sweetheart, sometimes you don't see how vulnerable you are. We were only thinking of your future. I leaned forward. My future doesn't belong to you. You don't get to erase me while I'm still alive. Silence stretched across the table. My father tapped his finger against the wood. Once. Twice. But offered no rebuttal. My mother kept her eyes fixed on the floor. Their stillness was heavier than any argument. I opened the folder and pulled out one sheet at random, sliding it toward them. This says I'm unfit to make decisions. Tell me, when exactly did I become incapable? Was it when I moved out on my own? When I refused to let you manage my accounts? Or was it when I started saying no? Neither of them spoke. Their silence was the confession I'd been waiting for, louder than any explanation they might have offered. I closed the folder again, my hand firm against its cover. The knock of my heartbeat was loud in my ears as I stood, pushing back my chair. They had nothing left to say, but I knew the fight was only beginning. I didn't sit back down. The weight of the folder still pressed against my palm as I looked at them. Two people who had taught me my first words, held me when I cried, and now sat silent in the face of their own betrayal. Why? The question came out flat, stripped of emotion. Why would you do this to me? My mother opened her mouth, but my father spoke first, his patience cracking. Because, Callista, it's obvious you can't handle it. The trust fund, the deed, your accounts, they're better in our hands than wasted on your experiments. I froze. He hadn't meant to reveal so much. My mother's sharp glance toward him confirmed it. So that's what this is. My voice hardened. Not about protection. Not about keeping me safe. You wanted control. You wanted the money. My father leaned forward, his tone sharpening. We wanted to make sure it wasn't squandered. You jump from job to job, living like stability is optional. You don't think about what happens in 10, 20 years. Someone has to... The words cut deep, not because they were true, but because they were laced with the contempt he had hidden behind fatherly advice for years. My mother reached across the table, her voice trembling. We didn't want it to come to this, but you've been distant, secretive. We couldn't take the risk of watching everything your grandfather left vanish. I pulled my hand back before hers could touch it. You mean your inheritance? You weren't protecting me, you were protecting your claim. The room stilled. My father's jaw worked as if he wanted to argue, but the mask had slipped, and what remained was raw ambition dressed as concern. I stood straighter, the folder clutched at my side like armor. If that's the truth, then at least we finally understand each other. Neither of them moved as I walked toward the door. My father's muttered curse followed me into the hallway, but I didn't turn back. I knew now exactly what I was fighting against, and it was no longer confusion or doubt. It was greed. The next morning, I woke with the folder still on the table, its shadow stretching across the room like an accusation. My head ached from replaying the confrontation, but beneath the exhaustion ran something steadier resolve. By 9. I was on the phone with a lawyer I hadn't spoken to since college. His voice was measured, professional, but I caught the pause when I explained what my parents had attempted. Bring everything, he said. Every document, every note. We'll untangle this. After hanging up, I dialed my financial advisor. The conversation was brisk, clinical. I revoked every authorization that linked back to my parents, canceled transfers I hadn't noticed before, and reset every password. Each confirmation email that pinged my inbox felt like a lock clicking shut. At noon, I sat across from my lawyer's desk, the folder opened between us. He scanned the pages quickly, shaking his head. These signatures are fraudulent. The medical reports are questionable at best. This won't stand in court. His certainty gave me air I hadn't realized I was missing. Then came the harder part. Do you want to update your will? He asked. I hesitated only a moment before nodding. Yes, full revision. And I want everything redirected. To whom? My cousin, Maris. She's 12. Too young to be part of this. Too honest to understand betrayal yet. He wrote it down without comment. I imagined Maris's gap-toothed smile, the way she still hugged me fiercely when I visited, and felt something steady inside me. If my parents wanted to treat me as a burden, then I would ensure their grasp never reached her. By the time I left his office, the sun was dropping low, and my accounts, my will, and my future were no longer theirs to touch. What remained was the confrontation I knew was still waiting at home. When I walked into my apartment that evening, I found them waiting. My father stood near the window, arms crossed, while my mother sat stiffly at the table. The air was heavy, the kind that warned of a storm long before the clouds appeared. You've made a mess, my father said. His tone carried no hesitation this time, only irritation. Freezing transfers, calling lawyers. Do you think this will end well for you? I set my bag down and met his stare. It ends better than the future you tried to write for me. His jaw tightened. We were protecting you. No, I said, pulling out a fresh set of documents my lawyer had handed me that afternoon. You were protecting your claim. And I know about the attempt to transfer my condo deed. You filed it last month for the first time. My father faltered. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. But she didn't deny it. You forged signatures, falsified evaluations, and now you tried to steal my home. I laid the papers on the table with deliberate care. As of today, every guardianship claim is revoked, every authorization nullified. You will never touch another part of my life again. My father took a step toward me, voice low. You don't know what you're doing. I know exactly what I'm doing. I answered. I'm ending this. The silence that followed was colder than any argument. My mother finally whispered, Callista. We only wanted I cut her off. You wanted control. And now it's gone. They didn't move as I gathered the papers and slid them back into my bag. Their stillness was almost eerie, like they were trying to imagine a version of me that would fold again. But that version no longer existed. I walked to the door, the sound of my keys sharp in the quiet, and knew the next time I faced them, it would not be on their terms. I had barely closed the door when the knock came, hard and insistent. I opened it to find my parents on the threshold, their polished calm stripped away. You're ungrateful, my father spat. Everything we've done for you, you're schooling. The roof over your head, and this is how you repay us. My mother's voice wavered, though her words were sharp. You've always been reckless. Callista. We stepped in because you can't manage alone. You'll thank us one day. I steadied myself against the frame. No, you didn't step in. You stepped over boundaries, over trust, over me. Don't twist this into care. My father's face reddened. You think independence makes you strong? It makes you blind. We were protecting you from yourself. Their words might once have cut, but now they rang hollow. Echoes of a script they'd rehearsed too often. I saw it clearly. Their version of protection was just control dressed in softer clothing. I'm not your project, I said quietly, and I'm not your possession. Whatever story you've told yourselves, it ends here. For a moment, silence hung heavy between us. My mother's shoulders sagged as though she might cry, but no tears came. My father's jaw clenched, locked against admitting defeat, without another word. I stepped back inside and closed the door. The sound of it latching was sharper than their voices. Final in a way no argument could be. I leaned against the wood. heart pounding, but for the first time in days, my pulse felt like it belonged only to me. The apartment was silent again, waiting, and I knew the next step was mine alone to take. The quiet settled around me like a blanket, heavy at first, then warm. I walked through the apartment slowly, touching the back of a chair, the edge of the counter, the cool frame of the window. Everything here was mine, not because I had bought it, but because I had defended it. The silence that once felt empty now carried a different weight. It wasn't loneliness. It was proof. I brewed tea and let it steep while I found my journal tucked on the shelf. Its pages held fragments of me lists, half-finished thoughts, the kind of words I'd never said aloud. I sat at the table where the folder had been and opened to a fresh page. My pen hovered before moving steadily. Let no one define your mind who wouldn't trust your heart. The words came easily, more certain than anything I'd written in years. I underlined them once, then closed the book, for a long moment. I sat with the sound of the kettle clicking as it cooled, the faint hum of the city beyond the glass. My parents were gone, but their absence didn't feel like loss anymore. It felt like space I had reclaimed, space where I could finally breathe without their shadows crowding me. I sipped the tea, its heat grounding me, and leaned back in my chair. I had lost something irrevocable. Yes, but what remained was mine alone. For the first time, I wasn't waiting for approval or permission. I wasn't defending my choices. I was simply living them. The night deepened outside, and I let it. Tomorrow would come with its own challenges, but tonight belonged to me, and me alone.